Welcome to the start of Ryan.
Join me in welcoming our friend, the one and only Ted Leonsis.
So I was born in Brooklyn, New York. My father was a Greek immigrant. He was a waiter, didn't finish high school. And my mom was a secretary, and she didn't go to college either. So I was the first kid to go to college. And I ended up coming to Georgetown University because I started my first business when I was 15 years old. I mowed lawns. And I was determined to be the best and most differentiated mower of lawns in my neighborhood. And so I went to the library and found a book on how to mow lawns. No internet back then. And I learned the Wembley cut. And I was fastidious with how I mowed lawns. And I got some friends and we trained them, and I was basically in sales and marketing and knocking people's doors. And at the end of a season, this one guy, Jim Shannon, said, "I really like the work you do. Are you thinking of going to college?" And I said, "Well, I am, but I have no idea. I have no direction. I don't know where to go." And he said, "Well, I went to Georgetown. You ought to consider going to Georgetown University." And he wrote a letter for me, and I remember you had to send away for the application, and you got like this little brochure. It had a picture of some students and of Healy Hall. And then the very first time I ever came to Washington, D.C., I ever saw Georgetown University was the day I enrolled in class. And I fell in love with Washington, D.C. back in the mid-'70s and have loved it ever since. So it's an honor to be with you guys. And entrepreneurs I love because not only is our country based on startups, and when you're an ethnic kid, you were raised with the idea that you could do better than your parents' generation. That was the fundamental promise of what America was all about. And I started my first business on the campus of Georgetown University, and learned at an early age the joy. It's not a startup grind, it's a startup joy of being independent, of doing your own thing. And I was a junior at Georgetown, and I had a rich roommate, dumb roommate, dumb money, just like you guys all want as investment. and he's still a close friend of mine. And I was reading the Washington Post. It's important to continue to read lots of papers, lots of magazines, lots of articles to get data from different industries. And there was an article in the Metro section that said the summer of '76, the bicentennial, the country would be 200 years old, and 40 million tourists would be coming into Washington, D.C. And I remember looking at Lawrence, my roommate, and saying, "There's got to be something we can sell to 40 million people." And he said, "Okay, you figure it out, and I'll finance it. You do the work, I'll write the check, and we'll get the chance to stay in DC for the summer." So my big idea was red, white, and blue snow cones. Snoko Loco Inc., be a patriot, eat a snow cone. But we had a twist. We introduced variable pricing. If it was 0 to 80 degrees, 50 cents for the snow cone. Great margins, cost about 2.5 cents to make a snow cone. If it was 80 to 90 degrees, $1 for the snow cone. And if it was more than 90 degrees, we negotiated how badly did you want that snow cone. And that was very formidable, seminal experience for me. I loved it. I couldn't get up early enough in the morning. I had so much energy recruiting classmates and young girls. I just figured if we could get lots of classmates and pretty girls walking around M Street and Wisconsin Avenue wearing Snowco Loco t-shirts. We got a dog, and it was Don't Eat the Yellow Snow. And we just marketed like crazy and built a nice little business. And I learned a lot about customer relations. I learned about how to manage marketing. We certainly did hand-to-hand combat-like marketing. We cut a deal with the zoo. We had our first OEM deal where we would manufacture and deliver to them 100 red, white, and blue snow cones a day, and then they would sell there. And so that was a great experience.
Okay, so this is kind of weird because there's no like amplification, but thank you for bearing with us technically.
Sure.
So I heard actually your daughter still uses this ice cone machine.
My daughter is a senior now at Georgetown. My son went to Penn, and now he's at Georgetown Business School. And my daughter last year decided to keep the family tradition alive. And she took the snow cone machine back to, and by the way, when the guy sold me the snow cone machine, I'll never forget this. He said, "Ted, this is the Cadillac of the industry. It'll last 100 years, and you'll be able to sell 1 million snow cones." And I think he's right. It's still making that red, white, and blue ice.
So you were actually born in Brooklyn,
Yep.
New York, and you were the only child. So, being an immigrant child, you must have spoke Greek in the house.
We did.
Okay.
And
So what do you think, Yeshu?
I don't know what you were just saying. You mean Yasu?
Yasu, sorry.
That was the Oriental spin on
exactly. With the really thick Oriental.
Yes,
Says-
and you can do studies about what makes for an entrepreneur, and there are, I'm sure the Kaufman group in Kansas City has some studies on what kind of ethnic background, what kind of educational background, what's the formula for being an entrepreneur. And I don't buy into any of that. I think it's a individual experience that comes from having high levels of self-expression and really a chip on your shoulder. The best entrepreneurs that I've met really have a strong point of view, and it's powered a lot by this fundamental belief that you can do something better than someone else. I helped a guy run his campaign for Congress, and he won. It's one of the reasons I came to Georgetown. He then became senator in Massachusetts, and I worked like crazy to help him get elected. And I remember him saying to me, "If you work this hard in a business that you start, you'll be a millionaire before you're 30 years old." I'll never forget that. But his thesis was that hard work really mattered, and that the ability to work one-on-one with customers and to be able to really take it to the streets and be able to work person by person. And it's obviously why America Online, we got America Online, sports businesses. I mean, I love people-to-people oriented businesses because I believe you can connect through hard work, through authenticity, through building kind of a sense of community, and that you can scale big businesses and have a really good time while doing it. And so his name was Paul Songas. He passed away 20 years ago. But he was a great man, and that was the comment that he made early on.
Sure. I actually wanted to continue on with when you went to Georgetown. You were actually a very smart kid. You skipped 8th grade, and you were actually a scholarship student in Georgetown. So I wanted to talk about when you first met you met your first mentor. Talk about how he had changed the trajectory of your life as a young entrepreneur. So let's go there.
Okay. So I did go to Georgetown. I didn't have any money. I had a lot of loans. I worked at a shoe store on Wisconsin Avenue. I worked in the library. I worked as an intern on the Hill with Congressman Tsongas. I was very busy. And because I was busy, I learned about bandwidth. I got a lot done. I was a really good student. I went to kindergarten early because both my mom and dad worked. I'm a January birthday, and then I skipped the 8th grade. And so I always had a high motor, but sometimes my ambition would not be channeled the right way. And in college, I got a little lazy. I discovered girls. I played a lot of sports. And Georgetown, junior year, you had to write a thesis, a serious interdisciplinary thesis. And so I went to the library, had a mentor who said, you have to get motivated. Why don't you start reading some books, novels, maybe you can be inspired. So I went to the library to find the smallest book I could find. It's entrepreneurial, right? Let's be efficient. And I located the smallest book in the library. That was a goal of mine. And it was Ernest Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea. And fell in love immediately. First chapter, it was a good day. The sun was hot, the water blue. Second chapter. So I read the book, and the book had religious overtones, spiritual overtones. And so I talked to my mentor about it and kind of gave him a verbal book report. And he said, well, you should go read it again. It's a short book, and there's a lot going on in the book, and it is interdisciplinary. There's some religious themes. There's some current event themes because Hemingway was a journalist, and he talks about the Yankees and Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe and history, and so I read it again, and I said, I'm going to do something on Hemingway. And I went and got his second book. And the second book was called Across the River and Into the Trees. And it was like 400 pages. Ugh. It was nothing like Old Man and the Sea. Nothing. And I started reading randomly a bunch of his work. And one day, sitting with Father Durkin, I said, I don't think he wrote Old Man and the Sea later in his career. I think he wrote Old Man and the Sea when he was a young journalist and became famous, started writing these longer novels. They weren't selling well, and pulled Old Man and the Sea out of the desk, freshened it up, and won Pulitzer Prize, increased his popularity. And then, unfortunately, he took his own life. He mustn't have been happy, maybe with his career, with his work. He was drinking a lot. Maybe he couldn't write anymore, and he needed to feed the monster, and he pulled this work out from his drawer. And Father Durkin said, that's a big idea. Let's prove it. I said, great. How am I going to do it? I'll go talk to his publisher. And Father Durkin, who was 76 years old at the time, a Jesuit priest, said, well, we'll use a computer. The computer, there was one computer on the entire campus at Georgetown University, one. It's an IBM 360 punch card mainframe computer in the registrar's office. I think it's still being used. And Father Durkin inspired us to create one of the first mashups of all time. He found me a linguistics major, this really smart young lady, and the one guy on campus who knew how to program in Fortran in BASIC. And we created together, the four of us, honestly, maybe the first algorithm applied to a non-computer science application. Basically, they had me go like at midnight some nights and input the first 5,000 words of an article written in like 1930 and a book written in 32 and all the way through the arc of his career. And then Old Man and the Sea as a control. And then this linguistics major created 17 measures. Words per sentences, sentences per paragraph, pronoun references. And then this guy wrote code, magic. It literally felt like magic to me. And we asked the computer, based on these 17 measures and all of this input, when was Old Man and the Sea written? And it said 1932, not 1950. And it really was a magical moment. I was like an English major. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I was honestly like the first generation to see a populist application of computers and software. And I remember Father Durkin said to me, I think this is the first time where liberal arts and technology have come together. A couple years ago, I had one of these goosebumpy moments because I was reading Walter Isaacson's book on Steve Jobs, and they asked Steve Jobs, why is Apple the world's most valuable company? He said, Apple's the place where liberal arts and technology come together. And Father Durkin said that in 1976. He lived to be 100 years old. He wrote 99 books. He was really a great, great man. And it showed me the power of a mentor. And now at this stage of my life, time of my life, I try to give that back because he had a really indelible effect on my life, my career. I've stayed involved with Georgetown. The first big check I wrote to the school, I gave it to the school in his name because I honestly don't think any of my career narrative would have happened without me being lazy and finding that skinny book and having Father Durkin inspire me to mash something up.
So, I mean, there's 100 entrepreneurs in here, and one of the biggest requests that I always get, can you hook me up with a mentor, an advisor? So what are some of the things that we should look into, some of the characteristics of a good mentor?
Well, most of the mentoring I do, to be sincere, are with underprivileged kids or young people that have a disability of some sort, because I think it's important for us to extend and embrace and bring everybody into the big tent. From a business standpoint, I've invested in 40 companies locally. I'm involved with Revolution Growth and Revolution Ventures, and it's a part of our value add. I will say that it's never been a better time for people in this room to start a business. When I was starting my first business, there were no startup grinds. There was no Amazon Web Services. There were no WeWork shared spaces. In fact, when you said you wanted to start your own business, most people thought, oh, you're going to open a restaurant or a dry cleaner. There wasn't this rock star attitude about celebrating your individuality, giving back to your community by being an entrepreneur. That phenomenon really is a 35-year kind of phenomenon. It really is. The birth of Silicon Valley and Apple back in 1976 really, I think, was the grounding of it, of the garage mentality. But until then, starting a small business, you were kind of looked at like, oh, you can't get a job with a real company. why would you want to take risk to create a job to pay yourself instead of going to work with a big company? When I quit my job, I had a good career track at my first job out of college at a company that I learned an awful lot at called Wang Laboratories. And Wang was the first populous computer company. I mean, I loved everything about it because its ethos was smaller computers aimed at women to liberate women who had just entered the workforce and unfortunately were being forced to do almost manual, awful labor in administration. And so it was, let's automate that task. And there's more women than men entering the workforce. This could be a popular company. And it was. It became one of the fastest growing companies ever. And I was on a good career track. I became director of marketing of the company. And when I fell in love with what I was going to do, and I told my parents, I'm quitting my job and starting a company and I'm getting venture capital, they had no idea what I was talking about. In fact, they begged me, why would you're not going to get a paycheck? You're going to borrow money? That's what venture capital sounded like. You're selling a part of the company before you even start it? Please don't. And I will, my mom died a long time ago, but my dad lived a long age. And as I said, my parents weren't very educated and didn't really understand. And I bought the teams. And I remember my father coming to a game, and we get home that night and we're sitting around, and he says, is everything going okay? I said, everything's fine, Dad. And when he left, he had like a card, and he gave me 2 brand new $20 bills, which was so my dad. It's like, I'm helping you out just in case things aren't going as well as you say.
So I wanted to go into what you were talking about, your first success. You were at Wang, and you started a company called List. And this is what I wanted to let everyone know, that everybody thinks that your big success was the AOL acquisition, but you actually had a bigger exit with your first company.
Well, I don't know, bigger one, but I had my first one.
Right, the first one. So let's talk about that.
So the theory of this case is how inspiration can come from anywhere, and that being open to new ideas. And one of the things that I see often are derivative business plans and ideas. And I hate when people come to me and say, it's the Facebook of healthcare. It's the Twitter of dating. And I understand why you want to try to ground someone in a soundbite, but it sounds boring and uninspired. And usually big ideas do come from different places. And so in 1979, I went to the West Coast Computer Fair, and I bought my first personal computer. It was an Apple II computer. It wasn't even really a computer. It was a CRT screen that you bought from one company, the motherboard, which you bought from Apple, a keyboard, which you bought from another company. There was the CP/M operating system. It wasn't even Microsoft DOS or Windows. It was the CP/M operating system, and then a couple of application packages that worked on it. And then I'm sincere, bought a manual from a third-party independent freelance guy who figured out how to put this stuff together and make it work, who was selling it outside the convention center in baggies like a drug dealer. And so I had this Apple II, and I was trying to figure out what I could do with it, and there wasn't much you could do with it. And I had the PFS database software and a word processing software programs right aside it. And one day, I obviously was a bachelor at the time. I went to the grocery store, and at the checkout line, there was a TV guide. And I had never seen a TV guide as a consumer. My parents didn't read TV guide. We had one television in our house. I just never watched a lot of TV growing up. And the TV guide had this starburst that said the #1 best-selling magazine in America. And I was shocked that I had never seen the #1 best-selling magazine in America. And I bought it, I brought it home, and I opened it up, and I don't know if they even publish TV Guide anymore, but back then the front of the book was articles and interviews with television stars and television directors and producers. And then the back of the book was a directory. What programs played on what network at what time. And back then there were like 10 networks, ABC, NBC, wasn't 900 channels, there was 10 networks. And I remember saying, I can't believe this is the #1 best-selling magazine in America. And what made it popular, if you can believe it, there weren't remote controls. And so you'd be sitting on the couch, and you'd be watching TV, and you go up, and you walk over, and you change the channel. And so TV Guide let you look and go, oh, Ed Sullivan is on CBS. I'm going to turn it on to CBS, and now I'll go sit on my couch. Can you believe that? That was the ecosystem that made for this big media business. And I threw it away thinking, how stupid. And I walked to my little home office, and I sat in front of my Apple II. This is 1980. And I went, oh my gosh, this screen looks like a television. And TV Guide's talking about networks. And I just came back from the West Coast Computer Fair and attended a talk by Dr. Robert Metcalf on Ethernet, how we're going to connect computers together on networks. And TV Guide's talking about programs. And I have programs, they're just data. And I went, this vocabulary, I bet you all of this is going to come together one day. And so while I was working on the side, I was scheming, dreaming about creating a TV guide about the computer and software business. And I eventually quit my job. I saved up a little bit of money, $18,000, my life savings. And I had a friend who worked for a big bank in New York, E.F. Hutton and Company. And I wrote a business plan to basically create a database of every piece of hardware and software that worked on Apple and Commodore computers. And I had read and heard that IBM would be introducing a personal computer in 1981. And I said, if I could create this database and a publication timed to the launch of the IBM PC in 1981, maybe it would be like TV Guide launching when televisions were first introduced. And so I raised $1 million. I'll never forget, I got to give my pitch. I wrote a 15-page business plan and made one pitch. And gave my presentation, and they asked me to leave, and they called me back in, and the chairman of V.F. Hutton, a guy named Robert Foman, said, young man, no one understood a word that you said. Nothing. But I think you could sell snow to the Eskimos. And they gave me $1 million. They owned a third of the company, and they gave me $1 million. And we launched, and it was a huge hit. And in 2 years, I sold that company for $70 million. And so I was blessed, fortunate, lucky, but I had a really creative idea, executed really well, timed perfectly. And so all of those things came together, and I had my first exit.
So I want to talk about that because 1983 you exit the company, and now I sort of did a little bit of research. In 1983 was a pretty good year. So Michael Jackson comes out with his song Billie Jean and Beat It.
Yeah.
Star Wars comes out with Return of the Jedi. Ronald Reagan was president. You launched your company and you got $70 million at 26 years old. That was a pretty good year for you, right?
And it's a lot of money, but that was really unheard of back there because we didn't have these mega platform companies with lots of retained earnings making acquisitions. The IPO market was nothing like it is today. And so I had been trained, like I'm sure most of you in this room, and as much as I love my mom and dad, I was programmed incorrectly, right? Which was work really, really hard. Get good grades. Good grades are a currency of measurement. If you get good grades, you'll get a good job. And if you get a good job, you'll make a lot of money. And if you make a lot of money, then we'll consider you successful. Full stop. That was the 1950s Eisenhower era version of what made for self-actualization. And so at a very young age, I did that. I worked real hard, I got good grades, I went to good schools. You know, I graduated first in my class, I started a company, I sold it. I declared victory, which was a huge mistake. Never, ever, ever declare victory. It's not about the getting into an end zone. It's more about the process. And I sold my company. I was now working. I was an employee for somebody. I lost my way a little bit. Didn't like myself anymore. And it was a real life lesson that occurred, that this higher calling of being an entrepreneur, of creating jobs, of innovating, I now felt like I had sold out. I had reached this goal, and there was a promise of you'd have bona fides of success stamped, but there wasn't a lot of satisfaction in it. And I counsel people on that don't define yourself and your win based on an exit. In fact, I don't like entrepreneurs who in like the first paragraph are talking about the exit. Well, we're going to do this and Google's going to buy it. And Google's buying companies, as we know, at 8 or 12 times top line. So that will value my company at $1 billion, and I'm going to let you invest at $100 million. And it's like, well, shouldn't we talk about like your product and your service and like your culture of your company? And we jumped right to the exit. Not appropriate.
So I actually wanted to talk about the moment when you had the day of reckoning. That was actually the same year, 1983. Can you talk about that experience and how that, when you went onto the wrong airplane, and how that changed your life?
I wrote a book called Business of Happiness, and it was a book because I was giving a speech on direct marketing on the web, and I spoke for 10 minutes about happiness, and there was a woman in the audience who was an agent, a book agent, and she came up and she said, "You ought to write a book on that, because everything you said about marketing on the web will be passé in 2 years, but what you just spoke about in the personal experience will be relevant for a long, long time." And I was very grateful for that comment, and that's what made me write the book. But you'll all have reckonings. I hadn't had a reckoning. As I said, kindergarten early, skipped the 8th grade, great school, started a business, raised money, sold it, declared victory. And I did get on the wrong airplane, and I had a reckoning. And everyone in this room has had reckonings or will have reckonings. An aspiration you have won't be met. Your heart will be broken. A financial setback will occur. Someone you love will disappoint you or will pass on. You'll have a health scare. Something meaningful will happen to you individually. Oh, by the way, that exact same process will happen to you and your company. Your companies are living, breathing organisms, not unlike people. I saw this at AOL. We were little toddlers, and then we became big grown-up people. And so reckonings need to be internalized and embraced. And I got on the wrong airplane, reading the book, you had all sorts of problems, and jettisoned fuel, and we were basically told, they recasted the plane, they moved women with men, they take this stuff. It's very clinical. So I'm listening to all this stuff on Malaysia Air and just trying to, conjure back up what the feeling was like, because we had 35 minutes to prepare. So it seemed like forever. To think of this plane flying with who knows what going on for hours and hours, you can't comprehend it. And as the plane was going down, people started praying, and people there was angst. And I started praying, and I'll be honest with you, I'm spiritual, but I'm not that deeply involved in organized religion. And so I'm praying, and I started to laugh. And I remember the woman sitting next to me, just like, "You're laughing now?" And all I could think of was, I'm praying, and as if God is tuned in, and he or she would be saying to me, "Oh, now you need me. Now we're Mr. Religious." Praying away. And it felt phony. And so I said, okay, I get it. Let's cut a deal. And the best soundbite I could come up with was, let me get through this, and I will leave more than I take. That was my pitch, right, to the big angel investor in the sky. Let me get through this, I'll leave more than I take. And obviously I did make it through, and almost a false alarm. We landed fine, no casualties, everything was fine. But everyone was really shaken to the core. And that next weekend, it's like, well, I said I was going to change. I said I would do something, but I didn't know what that meant. I didn't have any tools to help me with that. And so I made a list of 101 things to do before I die. It's a terrible list. It was written by a young person in great turmoil and stress, probably a little bit of shock, to be honest, but I made the list. And the list became this unbelievably powerful envisioning tool. It's probably not unlike what you do for your businesses, right? I can go in and turn around. I had to go in with another founder, and I was co-CEO for 7 months at Groupon. And what was the first thing we did? We made a list. Here's all the stuff that we're working on that we shouldn't be working on. Here's all the stuff we should be working on. Like lists, envisioning, having the check marks, unbelievable. So I did that for my life. when I autographed my book, I said, make your list. Very, very powerful metaphor. So I made a list of 101 things to do.
Sure, sure. No, I wanted to talk about this because not many people have talked or interviewed you talking about this list. So I want to get really into the list. It's utterly fascinating that you wrote this when you were 26 years old. And basically, this was an autobiography of Ted Leonsis. And you predicted pretty much your life 30, 40 years later. And so I wanted to look at this list, but you had broken the list down to 7 different categories: family matters, financial matters, possession, charity, sports, travel, and then you have this 7th category called stuff, right? So I wanted to talk about this, but how many of you have seen this list? Okay, great. So I'm going to go down through this, one item at a time, but it's fascinating that one item it'll take a person his whole entire life to just do one, and you have 101 of these. So let's just look at this. Number 82, you want to be on the cover of a magazine. Number 83, produce a TV show, go outer space, write a book, make a movie, write a Grammy, Oscar, Tony, Emmy Award, get an honorary degree, go to the White House and meet the president, advise a foreign government, and then you have this number 89, swim with the dolphins.
It's not. Don't emulate the list.
Sure.
It's but it's interesting what you said about how it's like my autobiography, and I think it shows the power of writing it down. The first one was fall in love, get married, have kids, and I obviously I've been married 27 years. I met this beautiful woman. We were dating, watching television one day, CNN, and a volcano goes off in Hawaii. And I say to her, we're just dating, go home and pack. We're going to Hawaii to go see the volcano. She said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I have this list, and that's one of the things on the list. And how do I know in my lifetime if there'll ever be another volcano that goes? And so we did. And to be honest, we fell madly in love with each other. Going to Hawaii, going to the Big Island, seeing this volcano, looking at whale. I mean, when I was approached to buy the caps at first, Dick Patrick, who's one of my partners, and great man, great friend, said, Mr. Poland wants to sell the hockey team. Do you want to buy it? Because he had read an article about me, and they published my list, and it said, own a team, win a championship. And that was his pitch to me. And he said, do you want to buy the team? And it was $85 million, basically $100 million to start. And I said, I'm married, I have kids, I'm president of AOL, I'm really busy, the scrutiny of owning a team is off the chart. I don't want to be like in the news all the time around sports. Thank you, but I pass. He said, okay, if you change your mind, here's your card, here's my card. And I went home that night and ate dinner, took a shower, sitting around with my family, my wife. She said, anything new? And I said, yeah, this guy approached me, said, you want to buy the teams? And my wife said, well, what'd you say? I said, nah, it's not a good idea, and here's why, my wife, my kids, blah, blah, blah. And he said, I love you, thank you. Thank you for thinking of us in that equation. And right before we went to bed, she said, what if you get 99 of the 101 things done on your list? You don't own a team, and how many times does a team in your hometown come up for sale and you don't win a championship? How will you feel? I said, well, this is why I love you. I'm buying the teams. How can I say no? And that's literally why I end up owning the teams in the building, because it was on my list. And there was that one moment in time, and I had all the right reasons for passing, but I couldn't live without those check marks. And it ended up being a fantastic thing for me, for my family, for hopefully the community, and it's also a very good business decision as well.
So we're sort of running out of time, but I really wanted to cover this particular part. In your book, you had talked about the 5 pillars of what makes a great entrepreneur. So I was hoping maybe you can cover that really quick.
Well, I'd say quickly that, again, my family's so important to me. I took a day off and went with my son when he was at the Potomac School on a class trip, and I went to the Library of Congress. I was like the parent rep. You should go to Library of Congress. They have the original draft of the Declaration of Independence and then every red line version of it. Right? It's a living document, and Thomas Jefferson wrote a pass, and Ben Franklin edited it, and the only line of text, when you look at all of the red lines that wasn't edited, was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I felt terrible that the smartest men in the world, our founding fathers, wrote a document and said life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness was what the country, the economy, we were about. Not life, liberty, and the pursuit of stock options. Not life, liberty, and the pursuit of big houses and BMWs. Amazing. And I'm with my son, and I went, oh, I'm being a bad dad. I'm programming my son. You're going to go to the best private schools. You're going to go to Ivy League college. You're going to go to business school. And I never once heard my family talk to me about happiness. And so to cut to the chase, my life's work and theories came down to, if you're successful, it doesn't mean you're going to be happy. If you're happy, you have a high chance of being successful. You mentioned Michael Jackson. He was the #1 best-selling musical artist of all time. He had an estate worth like $1 billion. He was so unhappy, he drugged himself with what they give you when they operate on you. I mean, think about that. I mean, I couldn't think of a better example of success not equating to happiness. And so, again, as an entrepreneur, being curious, I said, well, what does make for happiness? And can what makes for happiness as an individual be translated to your business? Are happy companies more productive, more successful? And so that was the theory of the case. And I started this 15 years ago, and just very quickly it comes down to a couple of things. One, there is no downside with being happy. Happy people live 4 years more than unhappy people. They have much less divorce rate. They have much higher productive relationships with family members. They're wealthier. Their productivity and wealth and health come from their being happy. So I said, if we could unlock the secrets of best casing what makes for happy people, I bet you we could translate that to what makes for happy companies, companies that would have longevity, that would create the most value. And that's what I've been working on. That's my investment thesis. And so you don't have to go buy my book. You can buy it on Amazon. So #1, might seem simple, but one, that you are an active participant in multiple communities of interest. We're social beings. Most successful product that I ever launched was AOL's Instant Messenger, AIM, which was Twitter before there was Twitter. We had 300 million people using the product. We never spent a penny in marketing. We invented viral marketing. It inspired Mark Zuckerberg. He hacked into AIM. That's how he created Facebook. A feature of AIM is what Twitter is today. If you've ever used AIM, there's status messaging. I'm in the library studying, I'll meet you at the bar later. Just 140 characters. AIM was one of the seminal communications products, and it was all about community. AOL was all about community. eBay is all about community. Starbucks is all about community. The list goes on and on of great companies that were based around multiple communities of interest. But as an individual, working at your business, playing in a softball team, going to church or synagogue or the mosque, being active in the PTA, the more communities of interest that you're touching and networking, the happier you'll be. That's number one, simple. Number two, that you have high levels of self-expression. We want to be heard as people. I said I was married for 27 years. I don't have a perfect relationship. Who does? The only time I ever get into a fight with my wife, you know what she says to me? "You're not listening to me." Does that sound familiar, guys? We want to be heard. It was mentioned that I blog every day. I blog every day. Ted's Take. I make movies. I self-express. I'm more a suit and a businessman than I am an auteur or an artist, but I've made movies that have won Emmy Awards and Best of Sundance. I'm very proud of the creative part of my soul that I can self-express in film. I wrote books, self-expression. Companies that activate self-expression from their customers, from their employees, unbelievably rock and roll successful. Come to a Caps game sometime. See how we celebrate. Anyone here go to Caps games? Yeah. Right? I mean, the guy's walking around in red prophylactic suits. The Capstronaut, the guy who owns the bar, who's like weightless as he's walking. Horn guy, the guy with the loud voice, goat. I mean, and the more we've activated that, we brought street performers in all year, like our own American Idol. High levels of self-expression. Number three, high levels of personal empathy. Empathy is the human emotion, most misunderstood, underrated. Probably a law here, Jeff, that says in DC, if I come and poke you in the eye, it's illegal. But I won't poke you in the eye because I have empathy. I know that would hurt, that would embarrass you. You might punch me back, that might hurt me. We have this basic deal. I'm not going to poke you in the eye, you're not going to poke me in the eye. When you read about serial murders, what do they say? Basic lack of human empathy. It's amazing. Empathy. Kurt Keel is here. Kurt, raise your hand. Kurt works for me. This is very, very true story. He runs communications. I buy the Verizon Center, Washington Post. Sometimes you lose your way with the media. Ted, what are you going to do to show change and improvement? I'm going to make the building clean. Oh my gosh. I can't believe I said that. I run back to the office. I say, Kurt, I screwed up. That's going to be in the paper tomorrow. I've never even met the people working our cleaning crew. Bring them in. We got to. And so I say, it's like my first day as the owner, and I screwed up. I'm so sorry. Let me tell you what I did, and I said, and I apologize. I apologize. I want to know what you guys do. Let me clean the building with you. Let me clean the building. I said, okay, wise guy, you want to clean the building? On Sunday, there's a Mystics game. Only 8,000 people come. It was the summertime. You can clean the building. Clean the women's restrooms and the lower bowl. Great. On Wednesday of that week, before the game, the White House calls. Say, President Obama and his daughters want to come to the Mystics game. Will you host them? Of course. President comes. Secret Service, 350 people. They shut the streets down. He comes in. They stop CNN. They stop ESPN. First time sitting president's ever been to a women's basketball game. I escort him to his seats. He says, sit with me. hang out with me. I don't have 3 hours of shtick with the President of the United States. What do you say to him, right? He says, I understand growing up, maybe ethnic household, I bet your parents wanted you to be President of the United States. I said, yeah, they did. That's funny, in my household growing up, I wanted to own an NBA team. Remember that. So the game ends, we beat Tulsa, he leaves, I'm like, I've lost myself again. It's like, this is great. And I turn around, and here comes the guy with a mop. And Kurt and me and my son, guys, you haven't lived till you've cleaned a public woman's restroom. And then I worked on the picking crew. You walked down each aisle, you leaned over the chairs, and I picked crap up. Public place, you forget. You got nachos? Just throw them on the ground and step on them. We found peanut shells, Coke, beer. One guy had given himself a manicure and a pedicure. Well, summertime. Okay. It was backbreaking, awful work. Now it's 3 years later. There's 1,700 people, full and part-time people there. I walked around the whole building today because we let everyone come in and show their school pride and watching the NCAA games. Went literally 2 hours, walked around, saying hi to people, shaking hands. Not a single person in that building ever says to me, hey, do you remember when you hung out with President Obama? But they all say, I remember when you said you're sorry, you screwed up to the cleaning crew and you cleaned the women's bathrooms because you showed basic empathy. You apologized and you wanted to walk a mile in their shoes. Empathy, unbelievably important. High levels of empathy, they build a monument for you. It was the last monument that was built in Washington, Martin Luther King, community organizer. Our president, they sneered at him. He's a community organizer. What does he know? I said, he's going to win. He's going to. When you read my book, you'll see we made the call that Obama would win the election. Why? What beautiful speeches. Martin Luther King, I have a dream. President Obama, high levels of self-expression. High levels of empathy. Martin Luther King predicted his own demise. He knew he was going to be assassinated. Empathy, really important. Self-expression, communities of interest. Fourth, quickly, out of the I and into the we. I hate entrepreneurs, this concept of the tortured genius, I'm working 24 hours a day, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Teams win. Wisdom of crowds, collective. Yes, it's good to have star players, but teams win. And getting out of the I and into the we through volunteerism, giving back, having products and services that activate volunteerism and giving back, encouraging your employees, your investors to volunteer and give back. Monumental, there isn't like a day that goes by. We're sending a check and sending employees to this charity. I think we support more than 400 charities at Monumental, the teams. So get out of the I and into the we. Lastly, that you find the higher calling in everything that you do. I've been criticized for saying this, but I don't just want to win a Stanley Cup or an NBA championship. I don't just want to get it off my list. I want to bring our city closer together. Nothing defines and brings the city closer together than a winning sports team. I want to make lifelong memories between fathers and sons and mothers and daughters and best friends. They'll use the ticker tape parade, the championship, as a touch point, an indelible memory for their entire life. It's a much bigger, higher calling than selling tickets and selling sponsorships on the digital signs outside. And so find that higher calling. In AOL, we never talked about let's build a $10 billion revenue company and a $150 billion market cap company. which we did. We went public at $400 million, and we bought Time Warner's $156 billion, the number one performing stock in the New York Stock Exchange for a decade, more than Microsoft, more than Apple. But our higher calling was create a medium, the internet, that is more valuable, more trusted than the media that came before it. Television, print, telephone. Bring democracy, level the playing field through educational resources to young people all over the world. Big higher calling. So right in my book, when we merged, we acquired Time Warner, went to my first multi-management meeting, ran out of there saying, oh my gosh, what did we do? I said, in my naive way, what is our higher calling? And I got $11 billion of EBITDA with $1 billion of synergy via cutbacks. I have in my office the AOL mission statement that I helped to write that was in the lobby. When I left AOL, I took it off the wall because we no longer had our higher calling. We were no longer managing for Main Street, we were managing for Wall Street. That company didn't do very well. It's really interesting, learned a lot. And finally, run double bottom line businesses. You can do well while you're doing good. And millennials, young people want to buy, want to be associated with, want to work for companies that have a mission, have a authenticity about what they're doing, and that their ultimate outcome, I think, ends up being more about leaving more than you take. And so that original deal that I tried to cut, I think really is a higher calling. Be loved, not needed, and focus on what is the double bottom line nature of my higher calling for my company. And that's what I try to probe and look at in the investments that we make. Sweet Green. I have two investments right up the street, Sweet Green and Optoro, both double bottom line endeavors. Groupon, a double bottom line company. We were factoring and giving cash flow to America's small business when banks wouldn't lend them a penny because it was 2008, 2009. We would give them a check up front. We trusted them enough to deliver the service over the year. People were getting laid off. They still wanted to eat out. Still needed to get haircuts. We were getting them the best prices, and we were providing merchants with money up front when no bank would believe in them. And there was a magic that happened. Living Social got into the business. We created a new category. And so try to find that double bottom line in all of your pursuits.
So, I mean, actually, we're running out of time, and usually we open up to Q&A, but I don't think we have time. So I'll conclude the interview with one, well, actually it's two questions. So one is, what's the most important piece of advice that your mom and dad gave you while growing up? And I'll ask you the second one.
You know, I wish my mom and dad were, I always struggle with this question. You get that question all the time on, you know, the kinds of things that your mom or dad would say. And I remember once on a homework assignment, my mother, who was more the disciplinarian in the family, said, you have to do the right things the right way. And there was no real negotiation around that. So if you were given a homework assignment that said you have to do a first draft and then, you know, have a classmate do editing around it and then write a second draft. And so doing the right thing the right way was something that my mom talked a lot about. My dad was more Greek, ethnic, and kind of funny. And he would say some things. I had one wealthy uncle, and I remember asking my dad, how did Uncle Stanley get so rich? And he said, he always sold too soon. Which, like when Snapchat turned down $3 billion, Uncle Stanley would not have improved. And so those were some pieces of advice to my parents.
Okay. And then one last question we always ask all of our guests. Who is your favorite superhero or historic figure, and why?
Probably favorite old superhero, because I do remember the only TV show I would get to watch was 5:30 to 6, WPIX Channel 11 in New York, and that was the old cheesy Superman. Christopher Reeve, who had a terrible life and took his own life, mostly because everyone thought of him as the old cheesy Superman. Because I used to love the irony, and I always used to wonder, did the writers do it intentionally? Like, Superman would jump in front of a girl, and there'd be a bad guy, and he'd shoot 6 times. He'd unload his gun, choo, choo, and you'd see the bullets go off of him. And then he would throw his gun at Superman, and Superman would die. And I never got that. And I'd say, is it intentionally being ironic? Are they genius that they're doing that, or is it just that bad? And then there was this one episode where Lois Lane died. And Superman wasn't happy with that. And he was trying to think of what to do. And he defied the laws of physics. He went around the world the other way. He stopped the world from orbiting. And it orbited backwards, changing time, moving time backwards, so that he was able to step right in front of Lois Lane as this car was coming that killed her and reset time. And I thought, that was really a lovely moment, that I'm Superman. I'm not going to set the Wayback Machine and like invest in Microsoft or Apple as a startup. I'm going to rescue Lois Lane. And so even for a superhero, love was really important.
Okay, so we always try to get the actual action figure hero as a gift, but you're a special guest, and we did things a little different. We actually created a superhero of you. So
very nice.
So that's your face, 3D.
Thank you. Oh, that's really funny.